Κυρίες και κύριοι, καλησπέρα σας. Ονομάζομαι Παναγιώτης Κακολύρης.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is Panagiotis Kakolyris. I am the head of the Political and Elections Observatory of the University of the Peloponnese. I would like first and foremost to thank you all warmly for being here. The Center of International and European Political Economy and Governance of the University of the Peloponnese, the Neapolis University of Pafos, and Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung have co-organized today's event in order to discuss a very topical issue, that is the role of social media in contemporary democracy, focusing on transparency, freedom of expression, accountability, and of course the role of journalists and the traditional media in today's digital reality. The idea was born in the aftermath of the incidents in Capitol Hill, and then the debate about the balance that is needed for today's democracy to find what I would like to call as the algorithm of today's democracy. Today's media cannot seen, of course, as just passive actors, because they are the ones which indeed influence what Habermas calls the public sphere. The digital agora, which is turned into an arena, Latin Roman arena. Now we have distinguished guests together with us, but first and foremost I would like to give the floor to the director of Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung Greece and Cyprus office, Mr. Henri Bohnet. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon and welcome. Kalispera also from my side. It's my pleasure to open up this conference today, and I'm very happy that on behalf of the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation I'm here to welcome you. As you know, the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation is a political organization and a think tank from Germany. We are active in Greece and Cyprus already for 8 years now, and our main aim is to work with our partners in Greece and Cyprus to find solutions to common challenges, and also to create a network of people dedicated to freedom, democracy, and the rule of law. And what we are talking about today is about the fundamentals of democracy. It's about the freedom of speech and how social media are changing our landscape. Panagiotis has already mentioned it, the way we communicate with each other, the way we interact, but also the way politics are operating right now. We see that there's a change, especially during the pandemic as well. Now, some call the tech giants from the United States the new masters of the universe. And Panagiotis has already mentioned the pictures from the Capitol Hill, but also the way Twitter and Facebook could shut up Donald Trump when he was doing his comments, or the way Facebook behaves with Australia. We see that there's a new power emerging, and the question is if our democracies are able to withstand that. I'm very happy that my colleague Lefteris Petropoulos has assembled so many good experts on the topic from different points of view, from different countries. I'm very grateful to all the speakers for being here today. I'm especially grateful to the cooperation we have with CIEPEG and the University of Pafos. Thank you so much. And I also want to thank the translators who are making this event possible in 2 languages. Thank you all very much, and I wish us all a good discussion.
Κύριε Μπονέ, σας ευχαριστώ πολύ για αυτή την εισαγωγή.
Thank you very much indeed, sir, for these introductory remarks. We are honored to have together with us the rector of Neapolis University, Pafos, Professor Pantelis Sklias. You have the floor, sir. Mr. Kakolyris Panagiotis, good afternoon to all. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure and honor indeed for our university, the Neapolis University of Pafos, a university which, as I am used to saying, is found on the outskirts of the periphery of Europe, with all the challenges that arise therefrom. So it's a great pleasure and honor for us to participate in this event, in this quite topical panel, with a very topical title as to the role of social media in contemporary democracy. And to us this matters for many reasons, and I would like to share with you 3 main reasons why. First and foremost, the partnership and the synergy with the foundation as the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung, which has made extraordinary efforts when it comes to protecting and safeguarding and upholding democracy and the rule of law. And I do believe that today's event is very closely linked to the objectives of Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung. I would like to take this opportunity to express my satisfaction for being today among good friends. And I believe that today's discussion will be the starting point for more discussions to follow in the future. Equally important, the fact that on this occasion, we cooperate with the Center of International and European Political Economy and Governance of the University of the Peloponnese. And I am delighted at the fact that together with us, we have distinguished speakers as Thodoris Georgakopoulos from diaNEOsis, a significant think tank that contributes to public debate significantly in Greece and abroad. Certainly Deutsche Welle, and of course the European Federation of Journalists. In other words, this is a synergy between far-reaching partners, and this can, of course, bring about a very fruitful discussion. I also feel that this is a very topical discussion indeed for an issue that it's of extremely momentous, an issue that has to do with all the aspects of contemporary democracy, with the issues like representation that are connected to the traditional concept of democracy, but also has to do with transparency and accountability, as Mr. Kakolyris has rightly pointed out. But I also would like to link that to decision-making processes and effectiveness, especially in an era, today's era, in which decisions are taken in a quite complex environment. So I believe that this dimension of the role of social media with reference to contemporary democracy has to do with the traditional perspective about democracy, and I'm thinking of the, of course, the logic and philosophy behind democracy, as well as all the actions that are being shaped given the complexity of today's reality. The third reason why today's event is very important to us is that altogether we are trying to gain some insight as to the deep understanding of this complex and multifaceted phenomenon, and with a view to putting forward specific tangible proposals as to how we perceive the role of social democracy in contemporary democracy, but also how a business and institutional framework could face the aforementioned complexity. So once more, I would like to thank you for the invitation. I would like to thank all the fellow speakers and other participants, and of course I am confident that today's event will bring about a very fruitful discussion. Thank you. Rector, thank you indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, as has already been pointed out, today's panelists are very eminent, very distinguished, and we will listen to the Director of the European Federation of Journalists, Mrs. Renate Schröder, the content manager of the Research and Policy Institute diaNEOsis, Thodoris Georgakopoulos, Mrs. Alexandra von Nahmen, the Brussels bureau chief of Deutsche Welle, and the assistant professor in communication and marketing of the Neapolis University, Pafos, Andreas Masouras, who is also a legal expert. So we will indeed benefit from his twofold capacity. So before starting this discussion, I would like first of all to thank Mr. Eleftheris Mitropoulos for the cooperation from CAS, as well as the Mr. Klapsis from the Center of International and European Political Economy and Governance for their support and participation. I would like to invite you to ask your questions on the chat of the event. Today's event is being live streamed through YouTube and Facebook channels of the three co-organizers. And allow me to say that this will be a vivid discussion with some rounds of discussions on specific thematic, specific issues, and of course our panelists may contribute and add one to the other and complement the interventions of other speakers. Now, I would like to start saying that I have been closely following the role of social media, and I can remember the first theoretical approaches as to the decisive role that they would have played in upgrading democracy. Back then, we were considering that democracy would become more direct thanks to the use of social media. Several years have gone by. Of course, social media have now are gaining maturity. Facebook would be enfranchised right now, is several years old. So I would like to ask our speakers to what an extent they believe that the expectations we had as to the contribution of social media and democracy are confirmed or not, and what, in their opinion, are the major challenges. And I would like to start with Mrs. Schröder. Thank you very much, Madam, for being here. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. I have to admit, it's not easy to follow Greek and English at the same time, and I appreciate very much the translator, but I will try my best, and I think I got your question. So, yes, you are absolutely right. When Facebook started, I remember very well the Arab Spring. I remember also our journalists who were very excited and things were happening. And in many other countries there were some springs, but unfortunately we all know that I believe quite a few things have gone the wrong way. Why is that so? Facebook started in a very innocent way as a group of friends talking together, and now it's one of the biggest platforms. We always use the word GAFA, which is actually all the American tech companies. It's Facebook, it's Google, it's Amazon, it's Twitter. So it's a huge monopoly who completely base their business model on data, on big data, on targeted advertisement, which I believe is not helpful for our information digital ecosystem. I'm talking here from the perspective of journalists, and I fear that this business model is only accelerating what we are also living in part of commercial media in recent years. That is this clickbait philosophy. And unfortunately, this clickbait philosophy is not based on trusted news or information. It's based very often on crash, on sex, on polarized conspiracy information. There's a lot of research that says the more clicks, the worse the quality of the information. So this is the starting point. I could go on and on, but maybe we continue that. But for me, the business model has become very dangerous. These platforms are working not in transparency. They are not accountable. And I'm happy to talk later a little bit what is happening at the European Commission, which different regulations like the Digital Service Act to try to regulate this sector.
Έχετε δίκιο, δεν μπορούμε να αντιμετωπίσουμε τα μέσα κοινωνικής δικτύωσης ως...
You're right, indeed. We cannot see the social media as simple companies because they address to audiences that go far beyond the populations of entire countries while having a budget which exceeds the many countries' GDP. But we will see later on what the European Union can do to that direction. Now, I would like to ask Mrs. Schröder, Mr. Georgakopoulos. Mrs. Schröder talked about the end of the age of innocence. Is it the same for you. We have, I mean, this era, has it gone by? You have extensively written about that. And I would like to thank you, to take that opportunity to thank you for being here. Thank you very much for the invitation. The age of innocence has long gone by. We are actually even forgetting it. If you remember, I mean, 10 years have gone by after Arab Spring. After those that age of innocence, two very important things have happened. First and foremost, these platforms have been turned into something else. Secondly, they have, thanks to the evolution of mobile phones, they are accessible to many millions of people, something which was not the case 10 or 15 years ago. Most mobile phones 10 years ago were not smartphones, had not access to the internet. Now, even in the most remote village of Bangladesh, people have access to internet with a very cheap mobile phone, which actually has facilitated the expression of all pathologies of human populations. Because, of course, the phenomena we have been witnessing as the dissemination of fake news or the use of means of communication, not only for positive but also for negative objectives or purposes. The methods in which some populations use those social media to organize even genocide. I mean, all that are existing phenomena. It is not thanks to WhatsApp and Facebook that these things happen. The fact is that these platforms today operate in order to facilitate these incidents. Now, when it comes to the core of their operation, this is something Mrs. Schröder mentioned. Now, when we used to be innocent, we were viewing those platforms as platforms, open areas, accessible to all, that would enable people to express one's views, their views, but this is not what they are. They are not neutral platforms as we used to believe 10, 15 years ago. Now we have algorithms that are well designed, well devised, well studied in order not to show what our friends post, but what the algorithm judges that increase engagement. How much time we shall spend on the platform, how many clicks we will give. The system sees what we see, what we view, understands what we like, and serves us all the same thing. And this is typical. And it is also typical that out of the extremist groups on Facebook, according to a survey commissioned by Facebook, and the results leaked, actually. This is in a survey of 2018. Those who would access radical groups on Facebook, 64% had found those groups, not because they wanted to participate or they were in search of them, but because the algorithm proposed those groups, which goes also for YouTube. So it is these algorithms that radicalize people, that actually trigger or incite what happened on Capitol Hill in January, or which facilitate the radicalization of the European youth who would go to the east to fight. I mean, this is the way in which they work. And this is very difficult to regulate, and this is the next step we need to thoroughly examine. This is the core of the problem. These are not neutral platforms, but specific algorithms which work in a specific way. Well, you have talked about the right on Capitol Hill, and as I said at the beginning, that was the very trigger, the starting point for today's event. I mean, we were thinking that we need to do something, we need to approach, to discuss this issue. And having said that, I would like to give the floor to Alexandra von Nahmen, who is chief at the Deutsche Welle Brussels Bureau. And if I remember well, she used to work in the US, so she does have a deep understanding of the American environment and atmosphere. Good afternoon, madam. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. So indeed, I covered the US politics and especially the White House, the Donald Trump White House, for 3.5 years. And I was also a member of the White House press corps, and that's why at almost every event in the Oval Office or in the Rose Garden and so on. And I think for me, there was quite interesting to see how much power social media can have being used by someone like Donald Trump, the elected leader of the United States, and someone who is considered a most powerful man in the world, or was considered. Of course, he's not president anymore. I mean, I don't need to talk one more time, as my colleagues just did, about this promise the social media gave us at the beginning, you know, a more open and connected world, promising to improve or do a lot of good things for our democracy, because I agree with them totally. For me, what made it very interesting to cover the White House and the US is to see how important the use of the social media, Twitter and Facebook, was for officials there, and especially for Donald Trump, who used it to influence his base. He used it to attack his opponents, and it also changed our way of working, covering him, because the first step was to have a look at his Twitter account. And sometimes you just have to imagine, I was sitting at my working place at the White House, talking to his press people, waiting for events that were scheduled, and they didn't have any clue what was really going on. It was the tweet by Donald Trump announcing that someone, for example, John Bolton, is fired. So basically, it really changed our work, everyday work, but I don't think that it doesn't have only negative sides. I mean, for me, whether it is in the US or now in Brussels covering EU politics, social media and especially Twitter is a very important source of information, because basically everyone is communicating via Twitter or Facebook, politicians, officials, and my colleagues are also there. So I think what is important to consider is, what are your sources? Do you know the people you're following? Do you know where your information is from? And this is, I think, a very important issue when we talk about the general public. People believed Donald Trump because he was their president. So he could spread lies and incite violence because they believed his words. So I think this is a very important issue, that we educate the general public to understand what's going on and how social media, we can use social media. And at the same time, we have to protect our profession as journalists, because, of course, as Ms. Schröder just mentioned, it's not all about clicks and likes, and we need to cover the issues that really matter, and we cannot just have the likes as the only criteria to judge what is good journalistic work and what's not.
Κύριε Φορνάνα, σας ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ για την...
Thank you indeed for your insights. Now, our next speaker is Assistant Professor in Communication and Marketing at Neapolis University, Pafos, Mr. Andreas Masouras. Good afternoon, sir. Thank you very much for having accepted our invitation. And I would like to ask you, what is your view? What do you feel about the expectations we had about social media with your dual capacity, that of a legal expert and a professor in communication? Thank you indeed for the invitation. Very interesting things have been said by the previous speakers. Both technical issues and institutional issues have been touched upon. And you know, I am quite concerned and alarmed. Why? Because we were expecting of characterizing social media as a new medium, as a digital medium, because there's a substantial difference I would like to elaborate on shortly. They tend to become a traditional medium, medium with the characteristic of what we call the traditional media. And what is that? What is that characteristic? The passive recipient of content and message. The passive recipient who actually is not a synonym with the logic and the philosophy of social media. Social media are based on interaction. This is the basic foundation of social media. When this interaction is not free, or if this interaction is put in a strictly technological framework, as the one described by Mr. Georgakopoulos, guided by the various algorithms, or based on the click-based philosophy, as the madams have pointed out, we can all understand that freedom of expression is limited. And it is not by accident that today, after so many years, we are discussing about the self-regulation or regulation of these issues. Of course, there are interesting issues, not only freedom of expression, but also the distribution and promotion of goods from the internet. And there are other issues that have to do also with the harmful content, the issue of fake news, the issue of who, at the end of the day, bears the responsibility, the legal responsibility when it comes to content. Is it who publishes that content, or maybe also who reproduces that content? So these are many of the issues that have emerged, and these are the issues that we need to deal with. Also at the level of the European Union, a serious debate started in 2018. However, still there are pending questions, pending issues that need to be addressed. Now, you are right. You have talked about the Trump case, and I need to say that no matter how relieving for many of us the announcement about the exclusion of Donald Trump from social media could be, it was also highly problematic. They found that the CEO of a company would actually censor the leader of such an important leader, elected some days after being elected with so many million votes, and after so much time, there's no judgment issued by a competent court. So what is the starting point for this right? Or can we allow those people to assert those platforms, Facebook or Twitter, for example, to assert that right? I mean, who gives those platforms the right to censor an elected leader, for example? And of course, I'm not thinking just of Donald Trump. I'm thinking of their ability to muzzle any other elected ruler. Okay, Mrs. Schröder, if you would like to answer.
Yes, I absolutely, do you hear me? Yeah. I absolutely agree with you. Even though personally, of course, I wasn't against what Twitter did and Facebook, actually ridiculously at the very end when everybody knew that Trump had lost. So it was an easy propaganda game for them. I think it is absolutely a no-no that platforms themselves have the right to take away content or not. This should be done by independent lawmakers based on international human rights. I think that is very clear, and I also feel that this is something that the European Commission is hinting at, and I feel the new Biden administration maybe on that side as well. And I think it will be very important to have a stronger cooperation now between the US and the European Union. As I said before, the European Commission at the very moment is working on a regulation on the Digital Service Act and Digital Market Act, actually to come up with a regulation regarding the liability of platforms and also the economic power. And we have asked that very much, that yes, there must be regulation, but yes, it must be based on international standards and human rights standards. We don't need new laws for that. We have all the laws there are.
Κύριε Georgakopoulos, εσείς...
Mr. Georgakopoulos, what do you think? Do the rules we have suffice? Well, this is also a very complex discussion. Now, look, Twitter is a program that belongs to an American company. It has clear rules that set what someone is entitled to do on the platform and what people are not entitled to do. These rules are published on their website, so anyone who decides to subscribe complies by these rules, with these rules. Of course, according to these rules, the laws of the country in which Twitter is based and the European Union cannot be violated. Okay, so according to those rules, violation of existing laws in most developed countries is not permitted, but these rules are also very clear. So, for example, if someone wishes to reproduce racial stereotypes, they do not have this right. So this will be taken down. The same goes with publishing photos from any genocide. These are the rules. These are the rules of the game. If someone wishes for someone, for another user to be killed, then Twitter will take down that account. The former president of the US, during his mandate, had 26,000 tweets, many of which would violate would breach the rules set by Twitter. And I'm not thinking of just the days in which the riots in Capitol Hill would happen, but he published much worse than that. For example, he reproduced a tweet from neo-Nazi or far-right organizations who incite violence. But you know what? This company would decide not to take down that account of that specific user. Or this was not the case with simple users. So why was there that discrimination? Why the rules apply to some users and they do not apply to the president of the US? This is an institutional authority. So the views reproduced by the president of the US have a specific weight. Of course, no one could expect that Donald Trump would have proven to be a Twitter troll. So this dilemma probably had never occurred to the executives of the company, and probably it had not even occurred to any representative of the institutions. Certainly, no one of the previous 43 presidents of the US would have never made use of that platform. But at the end of the day, who decides when these rules apply, when these rules do not apply, who is obliged to comply with those rules? And more importantly, if these rules are correct and express a certain degree of acceptable dialogue, how the rules are applied to millions or billion accounts, because the decision on whether the account of Trump will be taken down or not is an important decision to take. But if tens of thousands of other accounts which reproduce lies and which have, for example, promoted and incited the riots in Capitol Hill will be taken down is also a very important decision. How can we impose to a private company to take decisions in a way that will be acceptable by society, by the political systems, in order not to disseminate lies and fake news and other ideas that can harm people or populations, and how this can be done in a structured way and complying with the rule of law, which is acceptable by all Western civilization. It is not whether, it is not whether the EU can issue any other act to circumscribe those phenomena. I believe, however, that a good starting point is to accept that these platforms are not the only forums where public dialogue takes place. That is, that all of a sudden different rules need to apply to Twitter because now Twitter has some million of accounts, million of users. If there are dividing lines, then we need to acknowledge them. The boundaries are not very easy to discern, and an legal expert can help us to that. What is sure is that the executives of these companies have failed to address situations over the past years that no one expected, not even they, some years ago, when they were designing those platforms. So this is unmapped waters we are actually navigating in, uncharted waters, but we need to bring about a solution. And of course, no one lives forever, nothing lives forever. Maybe this is an opportunity for something new, for new technological solutions, given that these solutions have been spoiled. The Twitter, in particular, is full of disinformation and fake news. So maybe this is a unique opportunity to bring about something new, to give rise to something new. Maybe the solution is not up to the EU or the big countries to regulate, but maybe the innovation and innovative technological solutions can give another solution. No, thank you. This is very important. And allow me to say that this discussion takes place in a day in which, a day after a discussion between the leaders of the Greek political parties as to the dialogue that takes place through social media. And I feel, after having listened to the leaders of the political parties in Greece, I have understood, my feeling is that no one is actually fully satisfied with public dialogue, public debate, although no substantial regulatory initiative is underway. However, this is interesting to monitor to what an extent a transition, as Mr. Georgakopoulos has argued, is necessary. Or Mr. Georgakopoulos, how artificial intelligence could indeed bring a solution. So to what an extent the algorithm designed for digital bubble is the technology that we should benefit from to curb the phenomenon itself. But here lies the question, who should be responsible to design the algorithms in charge of making some order in this landscape. I mean, it is, we are used to saying that we will use AI, artificial intelligence, but how will this happen? Are we expecting Facebook to create another algorithm and changing the already used algorithm? But maybe, indeed, innovation is the only way for these platforms also to survive in the future. Because, of course, all this has consequences for these companies alike. I mean, let us not believe that the CEOs of these companies will waste their time before the US Congress talking about their economic and business model. Of course, they also need to survive. And there's also some contradiction. For example, I do not tolerate the toxic environment of these social media, so I don't use them as much as I used to in the past. But of course, all these platforms want to make us continue and use them. And certainly when it comes to the direct communication applications through a voice and image, very recently, some applications have been launched that allow privacy, do not sell the private data of users, and they are gaining more users compared to the other big giants. So maybe social media can find a solution, but this is not very easy to tell today. Mrs. von Nahmen, I would like to ask you this. Mr. Georgakopoulos talked about the double standards that applied when it comes to the Twitter account of former President Trump, and I am asking you because you are closely monitored and followed that course. To what extent do you believe that there was some tolerance vis-a-vis former President Trump, and to what extent something needed to be done beforehand, maybe at the beginning of the Trump-related movement?
Yeah,
Trumpism.
Definitely. Yeah, I would say you just mentioned a very important thing, and this is my opinion indeed, that I think that Twitter and Facebook as well, they should have done something about Mr. Trump's accounts earlier. He has been spreading lies on those accounts and retweeting other accounts, inciting violence for many years. And I'm not in favor of, the fact that a company, a tech giant, has the power to shut down a president. But I'm just saying that they didn't do anything about his tweets or Facebook posts for a very long time. I think for two reasons. The first reason was the number of his followers. I think at the end, 88 million, if I'm not wrong. And of course, his position. He was the elected president of the United States. So I think that was the two main reasons why they didn't do anything for a long time. And it's also very telling that they shut down his accounts after it was clear that he is not going to be reelected. However, I also believe that it's wishful thinking to assume that we can have a political political discussion outside the social media again. When we just look at the numbers, in Europe alone, in the European Union, I wrote it down for myself, 88% of people at the age between 16 and 24 years use social media. And so we have to assume that they are going to continue to use social media in the future. And that is why I think it's important to have indeed new legislations, new regulations to rein in the power of the big tech. Because the problem is that Amazon, Apple, Google, and Facebook, they are so powerful. More competition would be good, but they are, of course, preventing competitors from becoming so powerful. And that's why I think we need more regulation. We need to try to rein in. And now we have the chance with the new president in the White House, and with other countries also willing to do something about that. It's maybe a good moment right now to work together, because only working together we have a chance to change something when we talk about different companies, American companies and European companies, European users, American users. So I think that's the only chance to rein in and to change something. However, I think that the solution is in establishing new rules for everyone and not having international lawmakers deciding anything, because I am really not sure if any international lawmakers would have gone so far and decide to shut down the account of a president of the United States. So I think that we have to have something better than that, I would say.
Σας ευχαριστώ πολύ. Έχω δύο κατηγορίες ερωτημάτων.
I do have two categories of...
Μία κατηγορία έχει να κάνει με τα fake news, θα τα αφήσω στη συνέχεια αυτά. Η άλλη κατηγορία...
We will talk about that shortly. There are the two categories of questions. One has to do with fake news, and secondly, the institutional response, because I do believe also that loose self-regulation does not suffice, although this sparks reaction of who believes that there's not control on the internet. The social media are part of the international ecosystem. Of course, I do not believe that the freedom of the internet should be challenged. This would also be unfeasible, of course, but I'm wondering whether it's high time we created new institutions, new supranational institutions. Put simply, if we need an international internet law that would provide for specific rights, specific processes, and sanctions. Of course, I am aware of the fact that no organization can have the real-time speed of social media, but maybe this should not be a deterrent in attempting to find solutions. The supranational organizations, supranational rules were not born in a fortnight. They evolved over time. And of course, this also would never make us think that this is an ideal world we are living in, but at least would prevent the creation of a world jungle, of a world chaos. So to what an extent could we have some institutional safeguarding, and how do you view Mr. Masouras, the double initiative by the European Union, the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act that are under consultation in Brussels, and hopefully by the end of the year they will be concluded. Given that you have the legal expert's hat, you will pay the price for this double capacity of yours. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to agree with you as to the fact that self-regulation cannot be the solution to this problem because of the digital and technological nature of digital networks. This is why, besides, various entities are attempting to regulate things progressively, gradually. But allow me to give some answers to your questions, and allow me also to set the pillars, the legal and institutional pillars. I have written down 7 pillars on which the European Union is now trying to introduce a series of new harmonized obligations, as it were. First, the rules as to the removal of illegal goods, services, or content from the internet. The second pillar has to do with the safeguards for users whose content has been taken down erroneously by social media platforms. The third pillar are the obligations for platforms with reference to the prevention of abuse of their systems, because indeed abuse is what happens frequently, and we saw that through the examples you have provided. Another pillar is transparency of a wide spectrum of dimensions that has to do also with advertisement, with targeted advertisement through algorithms, and so on and so forth. Moreover, we have the pillar of the new powers as to the way these platforms operate. So we need to have an institutional body, maybe at the level of the European Union or more international than that, you name it, but we need an institutional body in charge of, for example, interpreting specific matters that arise at the level, regulatory and institutional level. Another pillar, which is extremely essential, is tracing users. And this has to do with two parameters. First of all, the content, which is illegal. And I'm thinking of fake news, for example, or even some examples coming from the criminal law, environment, child pornography, for example. So we need to have rules set about tracing users. We need to be able to know who is the identity of who makes specific posts, and this has to do with the last pillar that has to do with the cooperation between public authorities to guarantee the proper enforcement of rules and laws. Allow me to dwell on some conclusions of my experience. Now, we recently had to handle a case of child pornography in Cyprus, and I was impressed when Europol sends a sign for illegal content. Now, this is promptly identified, but when the things happen the other way around, so when a national authority tries to ask questions to these platforms, Facebook, for example, to have some answers on specific criminal matters that are being heard, for example, then it is very difficult to have an answer. And if this happens, if an answer is given by these platforms to the national government, then this comes with a great delay. And here there is an institutional gap, which is very dangerous indeed, because, you know, we cannot discuss freedom of expression and on the other side have this. So certainly we do have some contradictions here, and we need to take care of re-regulating on this. Now, thank you very much. And you are actually facilitating in the question I would like to ask Mrs. Schröder, to what an extent these tech giants should feel the stringent hand of a country government, of a national government. Maybe it is different when it comes to the European Union, because there are institutions in charge of that. To what extent the European Union should try to impose itself on the tech giants to that direction, Ms. Schröder?
Thank you. I'm not exactly sure if I got the question, but I just wanted to say two things. One, which already has been said before, is the question of freedom of expression, which remains utterly important. And that's why I before also stressed the importance of international human rights standards, because as you all know, everybody has the right to shock, to offend, and to disturb. And even if we want it or not, this right should exist. Second, we don't want to give to politicians the right to define what is disinformation. You use the word fake news. I really do not like this word, because it has been completely misused by Trump and other politicians in Europe to journalists who are trying to debunk politicians' disinformation. As we know, disinformation is a big part of it is coming also from political propaganda. And I think that's very important to use. Regarding the European Commission and what they can do vis-a-vis the platforms, I have been a member of the so-called, or I am a member of the so-called sounding board, where the platforms sit to draft a code of conduct. And you can imagine that we have been very disappointed by the first exercise of the code of conduct, even though we have to admit that during the COVID crisis, they were able to debunk, they were able to do some of the work, because probably it was not part of the business model. But when it comes to their business models, and that of course is utterly important for that, which was said already before, to have a content moderation that is transparent and accountable, to have transparency about the way advertisement is going, about the algorithmic work, about all the data they have, also in terms of data protection. It was now the General Officer of the European Data Protection Office who also started saying this targeted advertisement is actually against European data protection policy, which for us was a very good sign because, as was said before, targeted advertisement is wholly dangerous. So now within the DSA, what we are asking for is self-regulation probably is not enough. It should be some sort of co-regulation. But it's true, the elephant is out there and it's not easy. We don't want to give to the platforms the power to decide what to take off and what not. So we need counterbalance and counter-checking. And I think that's what is at stake now. That's why it's quite difficult. We had now a first round again with the platforms where, I mean, I was sitting there and I'd say, this is theater. They were really pretending they are the best and they're doing everything to get rid of this information.
Σας ευχαριστούμε πολύ. Κυρία von Nahmen, θα ήθελα...
Thank you, Ms. von Nahmen. I would like to go back to the double legislative initiative taken by the European Union, knowing that you have been closely attending and closely following the developments in the EU, and probably you can tell more as to the expectations that can arise from such a development.
Sure, more than happy to do it, but maybe if I may first just also jump into the discussion about how far freedom of expression can go, because of course I think it's important to make this distinction between crimes, hate speech and terror-related content, and then comments by people, because what I watched in the US, and that's the same actually what is happening in Europe, that we have this growing polarization of societies, people who feel left behind by the mainstream politicians, by mainstream, what they call mainstream media. So it is important to for them to be on board with us. It's just could have such devastating consequences that, to make them believe that all those attempts to regulate the tech giants are against them. Like people now, they used to say, you are not allowed to say that. It's censorship. It's our culture. We don't belong anymore to this culture. So I think it's really, and the America example is showing us what it means and what it can do with the society when you have such a deep polarization of societies, of the political system. So I think that is something that we really, and all the politicians talking about tech giants should take into account. And in terms of what the European Union is doing, I think that first of all, of course, this offer Ursula von der Leyen made to the new US administration to go together, to try to work together on the topic is, I think, a very good offer and could be successful, because Europe alone can try to rein in, but I don't know if that will be so successful in the end. And then, of course, when we look at the two proposals, the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act, so I think that they are reflecting the reality that we have a small number of tech giants who are very powerful. So if when the European Union is suggesting that they would be designed as digital gatekeepers, because of the number of their users, that's why they should be subject to more regulation. That could be an important step. And of course, making sure or trying to compel them to be responsible for as I said, crimes or hate speech content of the platform is also something that I think it's also the right step in the right direction.
Σας ευχαριστώ πολύ. Κύριε Georgakopoulos, εσείς έχετε υπάρξει ένας πρωτοπόρος.
Thank you very much. Mr. Georgakopoulos, you have been a pioneer when it comes to digital means in Greece, and also an important blogger. So listening to Mrs. von Nahmen when she was talking about freedom of expression, I was wondering what your view is. So how we can strike a balance. Mr. Masouras also talked about taking down the erroneous taking down of comments or posts. So I would like to ask you about the willing taking down of comments and posts of social media. So I would like to know what you think about that. When it comes to the freedom of expression, I need probably to remind that when we talk about freedom of expression as a consolidated right, we mean that this is an established right vis-à-vis the state. So we are all entitled to express our view, to express our opinion freely without being persecuted for that reason, which does not mean that a program on a smartphone or a computer is not allowed to have specifications that make it deviate from that from a direction. Even account, for example, on one blog or on one platform does not wish to accept comments, or a blogger does not wish to or does not approve specific comments and wishes to cancel them, then they should be free to do that, to delete them. Okay, so freedom of expression does not have to do with how we communicate one with the other, but rather how our freedom of expression is acknowledged by public authorities and by the state. Now, having said that, we often protest about the breach or the violation of that freedom for platforms that belong to others, while not all platforms are public platforms. So it is useful to remember that. In Greece, for example, this is the Me Too movement era. Finally, at last, we have a wave of Me Too movement about sexual assault complaints, and many were those who tended to challenge the right of the victims to publicly accuse their perpetrators with the excuse that those complaints may not be substantiated, may not be documented, may not be evidence-based. At the same time, though, we tend to forget the victim's freedom of expression. So the freedom of expression is a multifaceted phenomenon. In the past, in Greece, there was a case where a victim, a woman, many years ago, reported a plastic surgeon, not on social media. Actually, she lodged a complaint about harm made by that surgeon. And in the absence of social media, back then, she reported that case on the traditional media. Now that physician, having recourse to his right, accused the lady for defamation, and he won the trial, the court proceedings. Back then, the situation was not that easy, and of course, justice was not that speedy, but at the end, the court have proven him right. which, of course, should be applied today as well. I mean, someone could indeed challenge someone using defamating uses. However, the European court, to which that case was brought afterwards, have proven the lady right. So actually, according to the ruling of the European court, the lady was right, and she won that proceedings. What I mean is that there is no reason why specific rules should apply unless specific legal motivations exist or specific legal conditions apply. I am free to decide how my blog will be structured. I don't mean to, for example, welcome comments which I do not approve. The same goes for Facebook. Facebook is not a public platform, so Facebook needs, or any platform whatsoever, needs to be entitled to delete specific comments or accounts, or not accept specific accounts or comments, given that they are not public platforms. So social media, having said that, are yet another medium of communication. So considering all that, a holistic regulation is very difficult to achieve. I have heard all the previous speakers as to the power of the European Union to intervene in order to regulate. Well, I'm not sure that there are the available instruments with the European Union, the European Commission, able to impose some kind of restrictions or some kind of regulations. The tools we have to do with monopolies, with the trust, with competition, taxation. Now, these may be used as a negotiating instrument, but cannot resolve the problem. I don't know what tools we need, but I believe that we need new tools. Mr. Masouras, what do you feel about that? I feel that this discourse has also a legal dimension. I agree with Mr. Georgakopoulos when he says that my wall on Facebook is my personal wall, so I really need to be free to shape that wall as I wish. What kind of rights and entitlements I should have to delete or not, and what kind of distinctions should we make between the simple user, Panagiotis, Kakolyris, or an institutional body, an institutional representative of an institution? To what an extent an institutional figure needs to be free to delete or not some posts, and this threatens freedom of expression and freedom of speech. Well, thank you very much for that. There's no doubt that my Facebook wall is my personal wall, and I decide upon what, however, complying with the rules and possibilities given by Facebook. But when it comes to the wall of another user, who, however, is concerned with my own personality, my own reputation, or publishes my own personal data, my name, or insults my personality, for example. So you may understand that this is a multifaceted problem, and we need to classify the various cases. For example, when it comes to the digital news content, because of course my wall is not a news agency, is the Facebook of a user is not some news forum. So any self-regulation or any regulation needs to classify the different cases. And this is what the IMCO stressed, saying The Commission underlines that any self-regulation related process needs to be monitored and to be founded on indicators. These are the tools we mentioned earlier. Also, when it comes to the exchange of practices in different cases. So we all can understand how complex the issue is. And we also all can understand that here a philosophical debate also may be triggered with reference to the boundaries of democracy on the internet and when freedom is turned into impunity. So these are the things that need to be regulated. These need to be governed by stringent rules in order to safeguard human dignity and human personality. So when we talk about rights that are, say, enshrined in the Constitution. Thank you very much indeed. Now, there are plenty of questions that have to do with fake news, and I take the opportunity of having a majority of journalists here among our panelists. So I'm wondering whether there is any way we can address fake news and to what an extent this is an organization for traditional journalism to regain the user's trust, to restore the confidence of people and become a safeguard, a warranty of objectivity. So to what an extent, when I see on my timeline some news agency, I see that, I view that as a valid piece of news, item of news, and I can make the difference between real news, genuine news, and disinformation. So is this, Ms. Schröder, an opportunity for traditional journalism?
Whatever you mean by traditional journalism, I would rather use the term ethical journalism or trustworthy journalism. And nothing against traditional journalism, but we also had traditional journalism, which has not been good journalism. There is a lot of poor journalism, and there has always been. But yes, I think it's a period where, and we have seen that during the COVID crisis, research has shown that people go much more to branded news, to news they trust. In many countries, it's public service media, but in other countries, it's the traditional press or it's a special online digital startup. There are different trusted media in different countries. And that has been shown. In some countries, subscription rates have, for example, also in the States, the New York Times, the Washington Post, they have even profited of all these Trump years. They have really heightened their subscription rates. And I think it's very important to talk subscribers because they are the best guarantee for quality journalism. It's not the advertising market, which in any case is falling down. We also, I think, have been invited much more often to such meetings because people realize that ethical journalism, media pluralism is not the best and only, but one of several antidotes to disinformation. We need much more investment. We need much more sustainability in journalism. We also need more ways of innovative journalism, of new ways to get the trust back, because the trust here is a very, very important angle. Without trust, there's no journalism, there is nothing. So that's very important. And besides the importance of journalism, I just want to say, because we have been very legal, and having said that, I do want to repeat that I think we need the same laws online and offline, and we have international human rights standards. We have the European Convention of Human Rights. We have the Council of Europe and the Court of Justice are key, and this is very important. But we also need, it was said already, transparency, but we need independent fact checkers. We need the academic world, and I think they are very important here, to have access to all this data, to all this information, And we need to empower the citizens. I think this is also utterly important. We need to empower the youngsters, and we need to empower everybody to understand what's behind it, to understand how the algorithms are working, how actually this surveillance capitalism is getting on all those people. They don't know, and if they know, they may get really scared. We need media literacy also to understand what is the difference with journalism and why people should pay for it. What is the difference to journalism or to any information that is on social media? So there is a lot to do, and yes, I think it's a potential momentum for ethical journalism. Without that, we may fail with democracy. So, and I think I see more and more politicians in the European Parliament at least realize that, but also more right-wing politicians realize the danger of journalism against their populist ways of working. So we are in a polarized way, to say it again.
Αξιόπιστη, συνδρομητική δημοσιογραφία.
Reliable subscription journalism. Well, another dimension of journalism occurred to me. The public interest journalism, at least as this is exercised by Deutsche Welle, which I believe is a typical example of a pillar of a trustworthy journalism at the world level. Not the only one, of course, but I am thinking of Deutsche Welle because Mrs. von Nahmen is here with us, but not only for that reason. Deutsche Welle indeed has, through the Global Media Forum also, that takes place in Bonn, some interventions, and it constitutes the basis for what we call as a reliable journalism. So having said that, I would like Mrs. von Nahmen to have your view on that.
Well, I can only agree that it's important to be aware of what's going on as a journalist, as a media outlet, as DW, Deutsche Welle, of course. And it's also, I think it's becoming increasingly important to be transparent about how we do our work and whether there could be mistakes. I think this is a very important issue that and also, it helps us educate our users, our viewers, to show them what is our process of reporting, how we try to make sure that everything is correctly reported. This on one hand, and on the other hand, as just mentioned, I think it's becoming increasingly important that we do have this role as fact checkers, that we can provide the story behind the story, that we can convince our users and viewers that they can turn to us if they have doubts, if they have questions. This is important because only this way we can survive as a news media outlet. And of course, when we realize how many people, young people, are using social media, we also have to be there to reach them, to get them, to convince them that we are one of the media outlets they can trust. And also only if they know our work, they can be convinced of that. And this is, again, a very tricky position for a news media or a media outlet. Then being on social media and publishing, reports on social media, it also means that you don't have the entire control because the tech giants are not transparent enough as what their algorithm means. So if you try to reach your users and you are on Facebook or on Twitter, you can never tell, who is really controlling what's going on there because you don't have an idea what the algorithm is. So that's a dilemma and a tricky situation for journalists and for media makers. But I would like, if I may, add one more thought on the whole situation. We are talking here about social media, how to rein in, do we need more regulations? Do we need like a new tech tool to be able to handle the situation? But I think what's going on social media also reflects what is going on in our societies. I already spoke about the polarization of societies, but our democracies are also in a sort of crisis. And I found it very interesting that the new US President Biden, what he said during the Munich Security Conference, his remarks on democracies, how our democracies can, we have to make sure that people understand that democracies can still deliver, that this is not a model of a relic of our history. So this is also showing us or telling us that what we see online is reflecting what's happening in real world. And I think it's sometimes important to realize that.
Να βάλω μια διάσταση ακόμα, γιατί...
I would like to add yet another dimension, because maybe this me a lens when it comes to specific parts of our society, but this does not mean that, of course, they mirror the whole society, the entire society. What I mean is that at the University of the Peloponnese, over the past years, we have launched a research and policy institute, a political and elections observatory, in which we try to record the presence of political parties on social media. And our findings are that not always the picture is homogeneous. For example, we can see some cases as UKIP, for example, in UK, which in 2015 had more followers than Thodoris, that were the first party, but soon later, before the elections, they just got 10%, which also goes for Germany with AfD, which has stands high when it comes to social media penetration, but when it comes to society, so the elections result, we can see that there is some kind of distance. So we use an indicator that compares the electoral result and the social media footprint. And we have seen, for example, that AfD has a footprint which is equivalent to CDU. However, at the very moment of elections, these two parties cannot be compared. So to wrap up, yes, of course, this may be really a lens to understand what is happening, but it can also give a distorted view of what happens. And when it comes to the reliable and subscription journalism, I would like to ask Mr. Georgakopoulos, what do you believe? Could we go back to such a model as a safeguard in news delivery? Now, first of all, we need to remember that disinformation is not the offspring of social media. It has always existed, and it is founded on inherent defects of human personality, the way in which we understand and we process information, which is a human characteristic, of course, a human flaw. In 1996, there was also the story of water at Kamatero. I don't know whether you remember, there were tens of Athenians that would queue before the door of a lawyer from Rhodes, Kamateros, who would argue that he had found a miraculous water to treat cancer, and so people would queue to take that water. And as you may expect, of course, there was a mass hysteria, and Kamateros himself was arrested, of course, and convicted. But this is what today we call disinformation. So disinformation exists now and did exist back then, also in the framework of traditional, what we call as traditional media. When it comes to subscription journalism, there's yet another characteristic. But before that, allow me to say that objective and reliable journalism is the one that wishes to shed light on things that are not transparent, and this costs. This has a high cost. So either you need to ensure that you have that money from advertisement or charity, but it costs high, especially when you convert the news outlet in a subscription outlet. Then this is, of course, an advantage as against the enemy. Disinformation is for free. It has always been for free. There are no misinformation privileged places, channels. The disinformation is eternally consumed and reproduced, and with the help of algorithm, this is indefinitely reproduced. So maybe a solution would be to invest in sustainable models able to preserve good, objective, and reliable journalism, but it would be addressed to an elite. This is useful, but we need to have sources out there. Someone needs to try to find things, to investigate for that. And if the sources are there, then someone needs to refer to those sources. But this has been under trial since many, many years. The alternative models and paradigms of journalism, how we can ensure India will be full of documented information rather than disinformation. This has been at stake, and it has been tried by distinguished organizations around the world since more than 10 years, and the challenge has not been addressed as yet. And certainly, what you said is very critical, and we need, of course, to keep it very realistic, because, of course, we don't mean to give the erroneous impression that the entire that social media actually mirror and reflect real society. So real society actually is what we read in Twitter and society. You have rightly pointed out that this is not the case. This is a distorted lens. Twitter is a distorted lens. This is not a monopoly of information. Some 100 millions of people around the world use it. The elites use it to fight about things that for the simple people, the simple layman, is fully unknown. And the real political debate takes place on the social media, and this is the real problem. The great audience is not familiar, is not aware of what is happening on Twitter. Most of the simple people, the great populations, do not even use Twitter. It is the elite who actually use Twitter to embark upon the path of this political debate. So allow me to recap. A good journalism has managed to address the problem of disinformation and has not managed to do that successfully as yet. Secondly, the social media do not mirror, may mirror rather trends, but not exactly what is happening in our societies. Thank you very much. Before the end of today's discussion, I would like to ask some final remarks from all of you. And I would like also to ask you whether you are optimist or not as to the possibility to strike a balance between democracy and social media, to what an extent social media may constitute a medium, some means to uphold democracy, to enhance citizenship, active citizenship. I would like to start with you, Mrs. von Nahmen.
Thank you. I raised my hand previously because I wanted to comment one more time on what you and I think Mr. Georgakopoulos was saying, that that social media doesn't mirror what's happening in the real world. It's true that social media is not one-to-one what our reality is, but I would still insist that what is happening on social media shows what's happening, what problems we have in real world and in our societies. And they are, of course, potentiated on social media. As we can see, it's the same with political discussion. It's angrier. It's in a less civic way that normally we would discuss topics in normal life. But as I said, I still believe that it has to do with our real problems with regards to the state of our democracies and with regards to the polarization of our society. I think that we, even though the situation right now seems a sort of pessimistic and dark, and we have a lot of problems trying to really understand how we can move on to a more civil way of discussing topics on social media, how we can prevent false statements and lies to be spread on social media, how we can get rid of hate speech and bad content. I think that we are standing just at the beginning of the whole process, and that makes me so optimistic that I think that just talking about that, reflecting what's going on also helps us to find real solutions. And Google and Facebook, they had 2 decades, right? Almost 2 decades to grow, to become strong and powerful. And no one really, maybe not no one, but many of us didn't really notice what was happening. And now we know. So, and now we also see the consequences. So that's a good beginning. And I think being aware of what's going on is the first step to change the situation.
Σας ευχαριστώ πολύ, κυρία von Nahmen.
Thank you so much indeed. Mrs. Schröder, you have the floor for some final remarks. And I would like also to ask the same question, whether you are optimist with reference to the recent developments in things.
Είστε mute.
Thank you.
Είναι το χαρακτηριστικό πρόβλημα που έχουμε πάντα.
The typical problem we have.
Yeah, this question I hear very often, if I'm optimist, very often going to countries, specifically in the Balkan, where I wonder why journalists still work there, because they are harassed, they have safety problems, and they hardly get any money. And then I have to say, I'm an optimist by profession. I have to, otherwise I wouldn't do my job. And as Alexandra said, yes, I am. I think we are living in a very special period, but I think we also have to see it within history. We have had a rather short period now, I think the 80s, 90s of democracy, of peace in our little area of Europe. We have to add that as well. But let's look around the world. Let's look at all the wars we've always had. Even in Europe, it's only been a while. We've always had polarized societies. We have always had a lot of shitstorms around. So at the same time, we have probably more literate people than we ever had before. We have new technical means of doing news stories and what have you. So on the one hand, there are hope. And when I talk to students and young people, they always make me hopeful. But on the other hand, yes, we have all reasons to be concerned, to stand up, to be loud, to be in solidarity with those who are being attacked. To be honest, I've never had in the Netherlands, in Germany, in sort of Western countries where journalists are being attacked on the streets, where public service media, like in the Netherlands, have to hide the logo, which is sort of like Deutsche Welle, a trusted logo, because otherwise they are being attacked. So indeed, something is wrong out there, and we have to deal with that. And we also have to look at ourselves and see what have we been doing wrong. I said before, we have to leave the Eiffel Tower. We have to go on the streets again. We have to invest in local journalism. This is the role of journalists. Of course, we had this discussion on sustainability, utterly important. Without that, it's not possible. But journalists have the possibility to bridge to speak out to different groups in society, but they have to do that going out. It's not enough to stand, and that, of course, with COVID now being the home office, is not necessarily so easy. We are at the moment actually every day talking to our Belarus colleagues, and yesterday I had a meeting again, and it really drove me to tears because I've been there a few times and I know how incredibly courageous they have been. But they are starting to crack down. They are starting to get our colleagues, our association there, to get depressed. And we feel incompetent. We know it's geopolitical. The Russians are there, so we are doing little activities. We hear our dear Europeans saying, I'm concerned, a few sanctions, but nothing really is happening. I'm just using this example because at the moment, maybe it's the one that at least gets us the most. It's not dealing with social media, sorry. It's dealing with journalism, with democracy. There is the people who strive for democracy. They also use social media or whatever for these means, and yet we are there and cannot do anything. But I'm sure they will get there, they will survive, and we will help them. And that's why my call is out there. Yesterday I had a discussion with some German journalists who also said journalists have to stand together. When one journalist is attacked, the others have to be with them, whatever color or political background there is. And I think that is very important. This is for the journalism community, but that's for civil society at large. We have to flag when there is illegal contact. It's also our responsibility, not only the ones of the others. Thank you.
Κυρία Στρέντερ, αναφερθήκατε στο θέμα της Λευκορωσίας και μάλλον
Schröder, you have talked about Ukraine.
σε σχέση με την κατάσταση στην Τουρκία και στις φυλακές.
And when it comes to Turkey and some journalists in jail there, I would like to have your comment in that respect.
Me? Yeah. Actually, Turkey, we have had this problem for several years now, and actually now my Belarus colleagues ask me for advice what we have done in Turkey, because there we had years up to 100 journalists in prison, and the situation indeed is very, very bad. This is absolutely clear. Our colleagues, at least our associations, for some reason have not been attacked by Erdogan, whereas now our Belarus association has been seized and attacked, and the leader has been to prison. So there are slight differences, but I don't want to say one is worse or better. Our Turkish colleagues are fighting. I've also hardly seen so many courageous people, and somehow they are very resilient, even though the situation remains, of course, utterly difficult, and there are too many journalists in prison.
Κύριε Στρέντερ, ευχαριστώ πολύ. Κύριε Μασούρα, το δικό σας...
Thank you so much. Mr. Masouras, some final remarks from you, please. No, admittedly, I don't feel much of an optimism, although I would like to close today's discussion with some optimism. However, unless we consistently talk about the regulatory framework, and I'm not thinking of a more supranational level, but rather at the level of European Union, at the level of harmonization, unless specific parameters of this regulatory framework are put in place, I don't feel there is much of an optimism out there with reference to safeguarding individual freedoms and human rights, upholding the freedom of expression and so on and so forth. Let us not forget that there are various scopes. There is the public sphere and freedom of expression. We have digital journalism. Digital journalism, unlike traditional journalism, has its own typical characteristics. For example, speed. The real-time dissemination of news makes a great difference, and traditional journalists are not, or rather digital journalists are not familiar with the traditional practices. Traditional, as it were, journalists would by using just their password, they may make a post at any time. So there's a code of conduct that is required here for digital journalism, and digital journalism may, of course, benefit from the rules governing traditional journalists in order to gain from that long-standing experience of journalism at large. And I would like to touch upon a practical element, a practical parameter when it comes to access to information. Mrs. Schröder mentioned about that earlier. The problem today is the fact that there is a gap there, and we find it difficult to have access to information, which is why, although some cases are brought to courts, many cases do not make it to, do not make their way through the court because there is no access to information. The competent authorities cannot have a fully fledged communication with social media, and there is a problem with storage of information as well. So if someone insulted me and 2 days afterwards just they took down that content, how can I go to the court and indeed prove that there was defamation and that my personality was insulted by a user, or even issues pertaining to communication, market? So there's a framework we need to codify, we need to classify, we need consistency and cohesion, and especially we need harmonization. Once we have the necessary tools, once we codify the necessary indicators, then come and ask me again whether I'm an optimist or not. Thank you. diaNEOsis is an organization, is an institute which systematically contributes to highlighting inequality in a very quality way, similar issues. This is why I would like to ask the final comment by Mr. Georgakopoulos. Now, you talked about surveys, and now the World Value Survey is an unprecedented survey here in Greece. It records the essential values. It takes place in approximately 90 countries, and it records answers, mapping them on a value chart. I believe that in the next future, the social media will continue to operate as they do, to work as they do, in the absence of drastic regulating decisions by the European Union and the US. They will continue. Some groups will continue to act in a toxic way within the social media, in a way which is deleterious for our systems and our societies. I believe that currently societies which can enjoy of robust democratic institutions will be more resilient, as this has been the case already. I mean, we have not seen any Trump in the Netherlands. We saw Donald Trump being elected in the US, and this is inextricably linked with the history of the state. For the vast majority of the European countries, this will continue to be resilient vis-a-vis these phenomena. So these democracies will not be at risk. When it comes, though, to other countries, may have to address challenges, may find it challenging to address that. When it comes to the third world or even the US, we may see some phenomena that may be reproduced elsewhere. At the same time, some countries which do not have a democratic tradition will continue to suppress and oppress the use of these social media, unless the use of those social media is favorable for those regimes. So certainly we can see a gradual erosion of democracy around the planet, and this will continue to be so, but especially this will be the case in countries where democracy has already been undermined, as against other countries like the European Union, the Nordic countries, Australia, Canada. Maybe they will, I mean, these countries will find it easier to cope with the phenomenon thanks to the more robust democratic tradition. Thank you. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe that very interesting issues have emerged. Of course, food for thought, and many questions have been raised. We cannot give all the answers, but at least we can give some, as I said, again, some food for thought. I would like to take the opportunity to thank our distinguished guest for the honor of being here with us. I would like to warmly thank the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung and the Neapolis University of Pafos for the cooperation with the Center of International European Political Economy and Governance. I would like to thank all of you, ladies and gentlemen, for your presence and your participation. I would like to thank our interpreters for the difficult task to translate this quite vivid discussion. I would like also to thank WAVE for the technical support. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you again. I would like to wish you all the best, and hopefully we will have further opportunities to discuss all these topical issues. Thank you.